Welcome to the Youth Voice, a politics podcast giving young people a voice in politics across the island of Ireland. Today we're joined by MP for Sheffield, Heeley, as well as Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Louise Haigh. So thank you for joining us.
Hi, Dermot.
So I suppose we'll get straight in. Uh, in Wales, they've been given votes at 16 in local assembly elections. In Scotland, in constitutional referendums, they've also been given votes at 16. Do you think it's going to be brought in anytime soon in Northern Ireland, and then I suppose as well in the wider UK?
Well, it's something that we've had in our manifesto in the Labour Party over in Great Britain for the last couple of elections, I think, if not the last three. It's not something that I've always, I have to be completely honest with you, supported. I remember when I was involved in Young Labour, speaking against a motion and getting booed about it, and it was a very good lesson for me in learning to know your audience and adapt it. But I've come to change my mind actually, and in large part because there's been a lot of work around this that shows that the younger you start voting, and in countries and in areas where they've had elections where you start voting at 16, you're much more likely to carry on voting throughout your life. Whereas if you if the age of majority is 18, people are much less likely to vote when they turn 18, and then they're not into the habit of it, because 18 is such a huge transition year. It's such a moment of change for young people. But if you've got young people engaged at 16 whilst they're still in school or college, then it gets them engaged earlier and keeps them. So I've become a massive proponent where I once wasn't, and we sought to amend when we had the referendum on EU membership to allow 16-year-olds to vote in that referendum, precisely for the same reason as they did in Scotland, because it was a once in a generation opportunity to have a say on major constitutional change, and so we believe that was right for the referendum. But not just those, it's right for all elections as well. So if we had a Labour government in 4 years' time, then we'd absolutely have them for the whole UK, and for any and all constitutional referendums, they definitely should have them in the meantime.
Brilliant. I suppose actually kind of connecting on to that, the whole Brexit situation. I suppose while it might have calmed down in the mainland UK, it's almost gotten more tense in Northern Ireland with calls to get rid of the protocol. Some are saying protect the protocol. Some are saying no, they want it scrapped or amended. And, so I suppose, how do we handle the current situation with all of this tension and mess and anger?
Yeah, well, I'd say, firstly, although it's probably calmer politically in Britain around Brexit, there's been obviously massive disruption as well here, because of the government's very thin deal and because it came so late in the day. So we're seeing businesses impacted already, and that things will get worse because at the moment things are artificially quiet because of COVID. The hospitality sector isn't opened up. A lot of businesses just aren't trading at their normal capacity. So as things open up again, we'll see more and more disruption emerge. And of course, the deal that the Tories negotiated didn't cover services in any meaningful way either. So we'll start to see a real impact on the economy and on jobs, which will be compounded by COVID over the coming months and years. So, as I say, whilst it might be slightly calmer politically, we're actually more exposed in Britain because we've not had the we've not got the alignment with the European Union that Northern Ireland does. So I'm really distracted because I've got a puppy in the background. He's just chewing my shoes. Just 1 second, let me grab him. He's just come to live with us this week. He's not trained yet. Right, sorry, let me carry on. But in terms of Northern Ireland, obviously there have been real concerns raised over the last few weeks in relation to the protocol, and the understandable and legitimate concerns in the unionist community that people have around it, because it does put a barrier between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That although there have been some checks in the past, for over 100 years, because Ireland is a single epidemiological unit, there is now more of a barrier there, and that is that is an understandable and legitimate concern and a worry for the unionist community, like undoubtedly. And the more those checks and barriers are, the greater the threat that feels. So it's really important that we try and minimise any disruption and minimise the kind of barriers between trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And again, we're only kind of seeing the thin end of the wedge of that at the moment because of COVID, and also because we've got these grace periods coming up where we've had a sort of short-term exemption, but those will end at the beginning of April and at the beginning of July. And when they end, then the checks are going to increase again. But I'm certainly not in favour of scrapping the protocol. You know, it was tortuously negotiated over many years. I was part of those Brexit debates for nearly all my first few years in Parliament. And there was no simple answer to Northern Ireland and Brexit because of the land border with the Republic of Ireland. There was Theresa May's deal in the first instance that involved the backstop. That was rejected repeatedly by Parliament. And the protocol was the alternative. There isn't another one, and in all the calls to scrap the protocol and start again from the beginning, I've not heard any sensible suggestions about what it could be replaced with. The only real answer that we put forward throughout was for the whole of the UK to remain in the customs union and to align ourselves with the single market. And that would mean that we wouldn't have to have checks in between Britain and Northern Ireland. That was decisively rejected by the Tories time and time again. So that's why we're in the situation we're now in. And the only answer is for joint agreement with the EU to make sure that the arrangement is as flexible as possible and this disruption is as minimal as possible. But, you know, there's no point being dishonest. Like, this situation is far from perfect, and not least because Northern Ireland, the majority of people voted against Brexit. But we are where we are because of the Tories' red lines in the negotiations with the EU and because of their complete intransigence when it came to the whole of the UK staying in the customs union.
Absolutely. I think at the moment it's quite tense. I know just from watching the news and hearing the radio and all. But I suppose if we have a Labour government I think it's 4 or 5 years now, what will you do better than Brandon Lewis? What are you going to do differently for Northern Ireland?
Well, first and foremost, you know, for the Labour Party, for me and for Keir Starmer, we take Northern Ireland really seriously. Keir worked in Northern Ireland for 6 years. He was the human rights advisor to the policing board when Hugh Orde was the chief constable. The Labour Party obviously were co-signatories to the Good Friday Agreement. It's something that's very close to our hearts and that we have always in government and now in opposition treat as a priority. And that's just not the sense that you ever get from the Tories. It's at most a kind of problem to be dealt with or an afterthought, or at worst a kind of political football for wider negotiating means. And we've seen that time and time again in Brexit. We saw that when Brandon Lewis came to the House of Commons last year and said that they were going to break the international law by undermining the protocol. All of this creates instability and risks peace, frankly, and prosperity in Northern Ireland. And you never get the sense from the Tories in government that they really particularly care about that, and they care about the consequences of their actions. Now, there's no electoral advantage for either the Tories or Labour for in Northern Ireland, because neither of us stand as political parties. But as I say, it's something that Keir and I and all of us in the Labour Party feel really personally. It's why we've launched the an education programme on the Good Friday Agreement for our Labour members here in Britain, to talk about our role in helping secure that agreement, and also why it's so important that we have a government in the UK that takes the peace process and Northern Ireland seriously, and what is left to fulfil out of the Good Friday Agreement. So that's really my immediate political priorities. It's 23 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, before you were even born, to say what's left to be implemented. And there is still a huge amount that is left undone. And a large part of that is because we've had a government in Westminster for the last 10 years that has completely taken their eye off the ball when it comes to Northern Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement. So that would be mine and Keir's responsibility and priority. And we feel very passionately, the pair of us as well. And we spoke about it when he appointed me to this role, about the Labour's historic and important role as a neutral and honest broker when it comes to Northern Ireland. Brandon Lewis says proudly he's a unionist, and he's a unionist when it comes to Northern Ireland. Well, Labour are a unionist party for the UK, and certainly when it comes to Scotland and Wales. But for Northern Ireland, we take very seriously our neutral constitutional role when it comes to the constitutional question.
Absolutely. Moving on from that, I suppose another big issue in Northern Ireland, especially this year, is the Northern Ireland centenary. Mm-hmm. The Northern Ireland office are saying that, I suppose we're going to have a celebration or commemoration. There's even arguments over what we're going to call it. Yeah. One side of the community doesn't want it. The other side, quite firmly wants it. And then you've kind of got people in the middle who's like, oh, well, we'll go for whatever people want. So I suppose, how do we handle that kind of delicate, I suppose, situation with the centenary?
Yeah, well, you have to be honest, don't you? Like you say, and acknowledge that that one community will want to celebrate the creation of Northern Ireland and its part in the United Kingdom, and the other community will want to mourn the tragedy of the partition of Ireland, and they are mutually exclusive, that just is the case in the whole. And the point of the Good Friday Agreement was to build a kind of inclusive, shared future for Northern Ireland with equal respect for both traditions, and that whatever your equally legitimate aspirations, whether they be to a united Ireland or to maintain the union through the United Kingdom, that your identity be respected equally, and that you be able to live your lives and contribute to that shared future for Northern Ireland. So I think the problem with the NIO's approach to it is it's very one-sided, and it only acknowledges really the unionist wish to celebrate or commemorate the creation of Northern Ireland. That's totally legitimate, and they have absolutely the right, and we want to support them, mark that and celebrate it. But we also have to, in order to be truly inclusive, allow nationalist voices to be heard as well, and to talk about the history of partition as well as the creation. I think ultimately, though, all of us, and I think for most people in Northern Ireland, that want to be forward looking and thinking about what policies and what kind of government will deliver the shared future that was envisaged by the Good Friday Agreement. And I think the voices of young people in this centenary year is going to be particularly important, because they, I know, speak, in the sort of limited opportunities I've had to speak to young people in Northern Ireland, they often feel quite overlooked and underrepresented by politics there. And so it's really important that your voice is a platform to think about the priorities that we should all be focusing on for the next 100 years in Northern Ireland.
Absolutely. I think actually something I wanted to touch on there was that kind of feeling of disenfranchisement amongst young people. I know in Northern Ireland, a lot of people, they just do feel underrepresented by their politicians. And then I suppose one thing I've gotten from kind of talking to people in the UK is this kind of, they're all the same about politicians, and that kind of fear of, oh, well, what's the point in voting, or what's the point in going out if it's all just going to be the same, or it's going to be, another 10 years of Tories, or, Labour might come in, but they might not bring in the radical change that we want. It's just kind of they're all the same. So how do we get young people back involved in politics? How do we really kind of reinvigorate young people within politics again?
Yeah, I think there's a big disconnect between politicians and young people. I don't think there's a big disconnect with politics, because a lot of young people are really engaged in politics, but probably not in traditional party political means. They'll be engaged with campaigns in their communities around climate change, around housing, around education, and I think it's just really important that traditional party politics and politicians connect with those campaigns in those communities in their grassroots form, and so are able then to both represent those issues and interests, but also kind of bridge the divide between party politics. I mean, I don't blame young people at all. I mean, I was a weirdo. I would join the Labour Party at 15. I was elected very young. I was elected as an MP at 26. but I am unusual in that sense. And even when the Labour Party had a massive influx of members, we still didn't see many young people coming and getting very involved in those traditional party structures, because they're not very interesting. Frankly, coming along to your local constituency Labour Party meeting is not what most young people want to do on a Friday night. So we need to kind of break down those barriers, make them more accessible, make them more interesting, make them more connected with those grassroots campaigns. It is getting better. As Parliament has never been as young as it is at the moment. It's never been as diverse. In the Parliamentary Labour Party, we now have more women than men for the first time ever. There's more Black and minority ethnic representation, so it is improving, and those role models help. But I think a big part of the problem is just the institutions keep people at bay and keep people uninterested. Westminster is so far removed from ordinary people's lives in Sheffield that they just don't feel any kind of connection or inspiration by it at all. It's those barriers that with the institutions that need breaking down as well.
Absolutely. I suppose a final thing I wanted to ask about, with I suppose the recent polls, sometimes Labour's in front, sometimes the Tories are in front. It's kind of a back and forth, and it's usually 3 or 4 points. Do you think we will see Keir Starmer as Prime Minister in the next election? I know that's, I suppose, quite a big question, but
well, I mean, obviously, I really, really hope so. We've had 10 years of really brutal austerity, and young people have really paid the price for that. Whether it's through paying the price through increased tuition fees, or not as many work opportunities, job opportunities, cuts to education, cuts to public services. It's young people that have really been at the brunt of it. So we desperately need a change of government in Westminster, because the Tories have done enormous damage to our economy and to the fabric of our society. And one of the reasons why we've got the highest death rate in the world at one point over the last few weeks was because they ripped up our public services. They decimated our ability and our resilience to respond to issues, to anything that comes along like COVID. And the recovery will be much harder as well. So we've had a terrible impact on people's lives. We've lost over 100,000 people. But we've also had one of the worst economic impacts in the world as well, because our economy has not been resilient because of austerity as well. So we desperately need that change in government in order to invest back in our public services and back in our young people and in job opportunities and education again. It is frustrating, obviously, to see us kind of level pegging with the Tories and as you say, kind of slipping forward and back again, week by week, when they have utterly failed. I think there is still, even despite their enormous failures, that there is still quite a lot of goodwill amongst the population. People want to see the government succeed. They're kind of rooting for them, and they think, well, it's been a very, very difficult situation. They've done the best they can. That's eminently not true. They have not done the best they can at all. They've failed on almost every metric. And I think the big political battle for the next few years and in the run up to the election is going to be about how we recover and what comes next. So people won't necessarily in 2024 be thinking about this period that's just gone. They'll be thinking about how the economy has managed to bounce back and what the next 5 or 10 years will look like. And Labour will be presenting a very different vision and a very different strategy than the Tories, who, as always, want to cut back spending, cut regulation, deliver a race to the bottom when it comes to workers' rights and protections, and think that you can set the free market free and that will deliver investment and opportunities for all, when we know from all our experience that that's absolutely not the case. So very long-winded way of saying I hope so. We've got big political battles to have over the next few years, but the stakes couldn't really be any higher.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. I think we're going to leave it there. So for everyone that's listening, thank you very much for listening. Stay safe, and we will see you all next time.